Thanks, everyone. I'm John Collingwood from Bank of America. I just want to take a few seconds here to welcome everyone here in the room, and as Mike always says, welcome everybody out in live stream land to Bank of America and what promises to be another and what has become a long line of fascinating discussions that Mike and Jim and others at Politico have conducted over these last few years. Between the highly successful Playbook series and now this new series focused on leadership, we all have been witness to some extraordinarily insightful discussions about issues critical to our political process, but more importantly, critical to our country. For that, we're grateful. There's no question, Mike, that all of us that have been in all of these audiences have learned a lot from these discussions, both about the issues, but more importantly, about the people behind the issues, which is why we're here today. So given who is here with Mike today, this undoubtedly will prove to be no exception to what has been your successful string here. And I had a chance to speak to our two guests today, our two panelists today, and I have to believe that somewhere back in San Antonio is a very proud mother. In any case, in closing, sometimes we're asked why Bank of America has an interest in sponsoring these events, and it's because at Bank of America we believe that it's absolutely a privilege to take part in the dialogue that happens here in Washington, and it's a privilege to help inform the public about important policy issues that affect all of us, all of the people in this country. So with that, Mike, let me turn it over to you and to our guests.
Well, John, thank you so much, and thank you and your colleagues for hosting us in this amazing place in live stream land. You can't see the great view that we have, but thank you to the Bank of America for partnering with us on this and also hosting us in this amazing place. I'm appreciative to my Politico colleagues and the staff of the Secretary and the Congressman who got them on one stage, which doesn't happen all that often, so we're grateful to that. Welcome to all of you in live stream land. As John said, if you have a question, please tweet it to us at #LessonsFromLeaders. I'll see it right here on the Twitter machine. Thank you so much for coming in, Mr. Secretary, Congressman. I understand you have to go home to San Antonio to see each other.
That's right. That's true. You know, I've been on the job at HUD about 4 months, since late July, and Joaquin, of course, is in his first term of Congress, and he and I both say that we used to see each other more when I was the mayor of San Antonio than I do now that he's in D.C.
That's right, and the problem is he took office something like July 28th,
yeah.
And we've only been in session about 7 or 8 days since then, right? 10 days or a dozen days, whatever it's been. So people back home ask me, oh, well, you hang out with your brother now? And I tell them, not really, because I'm not there as much. You know?
So my running joke these days is that, he always says that the way to tell us apart is that I'm a minute uglier than he is. And I say these days that the way to tell us apart is that I'm the one in D.C. with a real job. So these guys are in session like 100 days, 98 days?
Yeah, I think it'll end up being about 98 days this year.
Yeah, 98 days out of the whole year.
Next year it's 132, I think, so it's more. That's good.
So are you going to take that?
Yeah. Him? Oh, yeah, I'm used to him insulting me.
No, between the two of you, who's the bigger fighter, would you say?
Well, it's interesting because even though obviously we're both in public service and politics, our experiences have been so different. I was in the Texas legislature for 10 years in a deep Democratic minority, of course, with
Sound familiar?
Yeah, it is familiar. It's the same thing here, And so I was in a body of 150 back then. Now I'm part of a body of 435. His experience in San Antonio on the city council has been quite different. So I think we've both been fighting, but in different ways and in different venues.
Yeah, he's been in more of a partisan sort of scrum than I've had to be as mayor in a nonpartisan role, and then up here, of course, you're in partisan Washington, but in these cabinet offices, you're a little bit removed from the back and forth that happens there.
So let's plunge in. Mr. Secretary, what's something that the federal government can do to help with blight in cities like Detroit?
There's a lot that the federal government can do, and there's a lot that the federal government is doing. But let me talk to you about something that doesn't necessarily require money, but I think has been very effective in different communities. HUD has something called Strong Cities, Strong Communities, which is an effort that the Obama administration created so that multiple federal agencies go on the ground and work with city staff to build up their capacity to compete for significant federal investment. So going out for a grant from the EPA or from HUD or Department of Labor, Department of Energy, building up the capacity of cities to do their fundamental work, to put themselves in a better position to grow and gain investment. That's one non-controversial, I think, very pragmatic thing that can be done to help lift cities up.
And Mr. Secretary, pull back the camera. Beyond the government, what else can be done to help with blight in cities?
We should be thinking, and a lot of attention has been focused on really place-based work that involves public-private partnerships, that is holistic, so it doesn't just look at housing, it looks at the connection between where someone lives and their educational opportunities, their transit opportunities, their proximity to work. So as we go about trying to rebuild cities like Detroit, or as we think about the rebuilding process, for instance, that's going to happen around Ferguson in the months and the years to come, one of the best things that the public and the private sector can do is work together in a holistic way to connect people to opportunity in life.
You look at the shots of the businesses in Ferguson and the adjoining town, starts with a D, very discouraging. What is that comeback process going to be like for the physical infrastructure and businesses in Ferguson?
Yeah, well, it's going to be, I think, a lot of what many folks are used to under different circumstances, whether it's a man-made issue or a natural disaster. You're looking at the rebuilding effort of businesses, insurance claims.
So a lot of bureaucracy.
Some of it, sure. I think that's a natural part of trying to rebuild. But it's also thinking in a deeper way about urban communities, and in this case, not just a typical urban community, but suburban communities, and some of the challenges that they face in meeting people with opportunity halfway so that we can see greater upward mobility in these communities.
Last one on this. What's the biggest challenge for Ferguson as far as infrastructure, or as far as like the physical construction?
I have to confess, I have not been to Ferguson, Missouri, and so, with that caveat.
The issues, and from
sure,
both sides of the table, both as a mayor and as a secretary.
I mean, here's what I see. I've traveled now as HUD secretary to something like 22 or 23 cities in 18 or 19 states. What I see is a disconnection between a generation of folks and the institutions of opportunity, good schools, a solid community college or public university system, jobs where they can make a living wage. And it's getting all of that together, connecting folks to those opportunities, expecting responsibility, but connecting them to those opportunities, that I think that's where the pay dirt is, whether it's Ferguson or other communities that are blighted.
So are you an optimist about Ferguson rebuilding, or are you worried?
Oh, I'm confident that they will rebuild. I believe that throughout United States history, where we have seen this kind of unrest, that those communities do get through that. I do believe that there are positive things that can come in the future when the community sits down with private sector assistance and public sector assistance and makes the right investments for the future.
Congressman Castro, here at the Lessons from Leaders series, we try to pull back the camera and get experienced people with remarkable experience like yourselves to tell us what you've picked up along the way. And you wrote a remarkable article in the February issue of Texas Monthly. You've already written your memoir.
Yeah.
So you're ahead of
6 pages of
the secretary on that. But you've done 6,000 words of your memoir. Mr. Castro comes to Washington, and in there you said the U.S. House of Representatives is designed for fighting. What did you mean by that?
And that was part of a larger comparison with my experience in the Texas House of Representatives. And for example, in the Texas...
Which it sounds like you're kind of nostalgic for.
Yeah, once in a while I am, actually. Well, for example, in the Texas House of Representatives, the Speaker of the House makes committee appointments for both sides, right? And so what that does is it essentially co-opts a minority, but it also eases some tensions because it co-opts a minority. In Washington, you have each party that makes, Nancy Pelosi makes Democratic assignments, John Boehner makes the Republican assignments. We sit on totally different sides of the chamber. We vote, we come to the floor and vote for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and then we're gone.
You point out that you have separate cloakrooms?
That's right. We have separate cloakrooms. on committees, we sit on different sides. So everything is so separated and so segregated between Republican and Democrat. And in that article, I point out that it starts right away when you come for freshman orientation, where everybody is siloed off into these smaller groups, mostly by party.
Yeah, you had a vivid image. There were like separate tables or separate name tags? Or
Check-in tables, yeah.
Now, for a while, a couple of years, they tried the buddy system at the State of the Union address. I don't think that worked so well, taking a Republican date to the State of the Union. Put that aside. Like, what would be a way to...
I thought you were going to ask him who would be his Republican date.
Yeah. You should have my job.
That would be Louis Gohmert. Louis, I get along with Louis.
He gets along with Louis Gohmert.
I go over and talk to him. People were surprised by that. I don't know why.
Okay, besides dating Congressman Gohmert, what else could be done to deal with this problem? People talk about...
It depends, Mike, how much you would want to upend the long-standing traditions.
Well, let's say you do.
So, for example, an easy thing to do would be assigned seating, right? Where you have people that are sitting next to each other in permanent seats and not separated by party. Another thing you could do is have people, which they've done in years past, to some criticism actually, have people sit in for more of the debate. Right now, you essentially have all the debate for the amendments and the bills, and then you come and take 5 votes in a row, or 6 or 7 votes in a row, sometimes 1 vote. Right? You could have people sitting together while some of that is going on more. Same thing in committee. You don't have to be separated by party. You could just do it by seniority.
So you'd been in the Texas legislature. You knew how Congress worked, but what surprised you most about the mechanics of it? Either something that Congress does or doesn't do when you saw it firsthand?
Well, what surprised me most was the pace and the productivity and the pace don't match the output. Basically, you have members of Congress from both parties that are probably working, if you include all of the official stuff and the political stuff, 10 to 12 hours a day usually, but the output, that's everybody as an individual. But then you take the output as a whole of the Congress, and it's not very much.
What's the dumbest thing that you have to do?
The dumbest thing that I have to do? There's things that none of us really like doing, right? Nobody likes calling people for money. That's not enjoyable. I don't know if it's dumb, but it's not enjoyable.
Yeah, don't let the donors hear that.
Yeah.
And I hear you're pretty good at it.
Yeah, when I have to be, sure.
So magazine editors maybe aren't very creative. Your headline was Mr. Castro comes to Washington. I sure wish y'all could get some good publicity. The Economist this week has a great Lexington column about you. Mr. Castro goes to Washington. A rising Hispanic star ponders how to reconcile Americans with the federal government. And in there you say the federal government should be a catalyst and a referee as opposed to what?
Catalyst and a referee as opposed to the sole source that folks rely on, because it's very clear that, especially over the last 35 years, we've moved away in the United States from the commitment, I think, as a nation that we used to have that meant primary government investment. At HUD, we have seen our workforce shrink from January of 1981 to now from 16,500 folks to about 8,500 folks. And so almost get cut in half. And I think that if you were to go department by department, it's a common story with regard to outlays and personnel that many of them are challenged. Now, a lot of people think of the federal government and they only think of it growing one way, but that's not uniformly true among these departments. So we need a federal government that is nimble, that is able to engage the private sector in collaborative ways with the same goals. I think that's an important caveat. We're not changing the goal. The goal is still in the United States to help ensure that everyone can achieve the American dream and that we have upward mobility in the United States. But we can get there, I think, by working together and being collaborative, and that was the point that I made in the article.
Now, Mr. Secretary, you like to say that in your heart you're still a mayor, and the Economist story says that you seem to be trying something intriguing, treating HUD like City Hall. What do they mean?
In different ways. First of all, getting to know the employees. I've made it a point to try and get to shake hands with everybody there at the headquarters and visit all of our regional offices and get on the ground and understand what's really going on in the organization to try and improve it. Secondly, the thing about being mayor, and those of y'all who have worked in local government or you've watched it, you know, is that you're in the spotlight all the time. And if you're a city council member and somebody calls about the neighbor's dog that is barking too much or the grass that is too high across the street, they have a way of measuring that. Is that dog still barking, or is that grass still too high a week later or
did
one
the
day
trash
later?
get picked
Yeah,
up,
did
or
the
did my
trash
street
get
get
picked up?
fixed?
Did the
Yeah.
pothole get fixed within 24 hours? So one of the things we're trying to do at HUD is build on the work that Sean Donovan started with HUDstat to measure our outcomes a lot better, so that we can show with these investments that we make in public housing or in assisted housing across the board, what are the outcomes in life that are being produced? What's the opportunity that's being produced?
Now, one example of that is high school graduation rates in public housing. What's another example of where you're using metrics or want to use metrics?
Yeah, so another example would be how many folks who live in public housing, for instance, access job training and then actually go on and either get a job if they didn't have one when they started, or get a job that pays more than they were making before, so that they can become self-sufficient in the future. I think that's important, particularly important these days, because it's getting harder and harder to make an argument, make the case in the budget process for our initiatives. So we want to measure those outcomes and be able to show not just the investment, but the result.
Now, in Charlotte in 2012, where we partnered with Bank of America on some playbook breakfasts there, you were the first Latino to give the keynote address at the Democratic National Convention. And you told America the story of your grandmother who 100 years ago as an orphan had come to the United States, and you gave a very vivid image of her seeing you off to school each day.
Yeah. Yes, we grew up with our mother and our grandmother mostly, and my grandmother, her name was Victoria. When we would go to school, she would make the sign of the cross, and say, "Que Dios los bendiga," may God bless you. And that's what we remember, part of what we remember growing up. And for us, for me, somebody who was not formally well educated because she dropped out in elementary school, but who really helped us to believe in ourselves and who served as an inspiration to us.
And how did she do that? I have 11 nieces and nephews, my 3 siblings, 8 boys. And I often think that if you could give a kid confidence, it almost makes up for anything, being a bad athlete or being bad in school or whatever. Like, how do you give a kid confidence?
I mean, and I have a 5.5-year-old daughter. I would say that, and this is not groundbreaking.
Who's named for her grandmother?
Her middle name, Victoria,
yeah.
I mean, I think that it starts with and this is very straightforward, it sounds cheesy, but it starts with making sure that they know that they're unconditionally loved as an individual, whether they make a mistake or they do something very well, so that they look forward to succeeding, but they're also not afraid to fail and to learn from that. And we always felt like that. Of course, we grew up in a household with my mother who was very, very lenient, who had grown up herself in a very strict Catholic household. But for us, by the time we came along, pretty much let us do whatever we wanted. But because of that...
Not quite whatever we wanted to do. A lot.
But because of that, we sort of self-regulated, and we had each other.
We were very competitive growing up, and I think that also helped keep us both on the straight and narrow, but also helped us to excel in different ways.
Now, Congressman, your mother, Rosie, is a fascinating story of her own. She was an activist, is an activist.
Yeah, my grandmother was not political. My grandmother came here in the early 1920s when she was 6 years old with her younger sister, because both her parents had died during the time of the Mexican Revolution. But my grandmother didn't become a citizen until the early 1960s. And so she worked. She didn't have a formal education. She worked as a maid, a babysitter, and a cook, basically her whole life, until she couldn't anymore. But so my grandmother was not political at all. It was my mom who grew up basically as a baby boomer, was growing up in the 50s and 60s, that really came alive and possessed this political and civic conscience. I think that she helped, both my parents helped pass on to us. So she was very involved in the Mexican-American civil rights movement in Texas. She was part of a third party back then that developed throughout the southwestern United States, the Raza Unida Party. They were a spin-off of the Democratic Party, which at that time was so dominant in Texas and in other states. And they were essentially running on a platform for Mexican-American civil rights. in the 60s and early 70s.
And what did you learn from your mom about political organizing?
A few things, or several things. Number one, that it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of passion, and it takes initiative. My mom ran for office when she was 23 years old. She ran for the San Antonio City Council at a time when I don't know that there was a single woman that was on council at that time. There were maybe one or two Hispanics. There were still no single-member districts in Texas, so you had a place system, an at-large place system.
She didn't win, but
She didn't win, right?
Yeah.
She was never an elected official. But just the dedication and the commitment and the energy and the idea that you have to persist because it's not going to happen, at least not everything is going to happen overnight.
All right, this is a jump ball question. Either of you may buzz in. We'll see how. I'd like you to name a leader you admire who's alive and a leader you admire who's not alive.
You want to take the alive and I'll take the not alive?
Let me see. Yeah, plenty of folks. Right now, and I want to go off the
Now,
beaten
he's
track.
stalling. You have your answer, so you go ahead.
All right, go ahead.
Someone who is not alive?
Sure.
Well, several folks. I mean, I think, we grew up reading about Robert Kennedy, also Cesar Chavez and his push for migrant farm worker rights.
And what is it that you learn from them, or what is it about them that makes them worthy of us talking about, reading about, internalizing?
I think, first of all, with Cesar Chavez, just a commitment to a cause and to people who necessarily don't have the strongest voice out there in the United States, and a commitment to improving their lot in life, and I think very importantly, doing it through democratic means. One of the things about my mother's time frame and activism that was we were hearing about it and reading about it later, and as I've read more about the civil rights movement in general, that has always astonished me is that people would get called names, whether it was communist or socialist or whatever it was, for basically exercising the democratic, participating in the democratic process. And so, I admire folks who have been able to bring an issue like Cesar Chavez did to the forefront of people who needed a strong voice.
Congressman, a living leader.
Can I give you two examples? One a person, one a group, actually. Somebody that I served with, John Lewis, who was so active in the civil rights movement in the South, but has continued that activism. He was essentially back then an activist on the outside of the establishments of power. Now, somebody who is very active on the inside within Congress and has been a bridge, I think, from that era to this one, and still has a very prominent voice. And the second part now is, I think if you look throughout U.S. history and even world history, the great movements in this country have not come from politicians. They've come mostly through young people. And what the DREAM Act students are doing and have done over the last several years, I think, is remarkable. And some of those leaders are just incredible folks.
And what's the lesson we can take from how the DREAM Act kids have succeeded in making their case, putting their issue on the radar?
That you've got to put yourself out there, that you've got to take initiative, that you've got to be willing to take all the criticism. When they started in 2006, I see 2006 as kind of a watershed year when you had all those marches across the country, particularly in the southwestern United States. That was not a popular position to take, and they have made it more popular through their activism.
Please tweet us your questions at #lessons from leaders. Secretary, we have a Twitter question, which I'm going to let you read.
Okay. It says, do the Castros ever feel sibling rivalry in adult careers? That's a good question. Not really. I have the better job, so I don't look backward. I'm just kidding. We were very competitive when we were growing up. Like, I'm sure has anybody in here been a twin or is a twin?
Anybody a twin?
Anybody a
Identical
twin in the room?
No.
Well, if somebody's a twin, or if you have siblings or good friends that are twins, you know that it really is a unique relationship. And because you look alike, because you're growing up in the same environment, because you're oftentimes in the same classes, going to school together, it's a natural kind of fertile ground for competition. Fortunately, you do grow out of that, and we did grow out of that. And today, we're each other's really biggest supporter.
And went to the same college and law school. Were you roommates?
No. I shared a room with him for 17 years. By college, that was
We were
it.
bunk beds for most of that time. Yeah,
All right.
we were done with each other at least, but at least for 10 feet of space. Yeah.
Ms. Secretary, after your speech at the Charlotte convention, Jimmy Fallon did his own version of your speech, and Jimmy Fallon, doing Secretary, then Mayor Castro, says, "I have a twin brother, and in case you're wondering, yes, sometimes we totally switch lives for a day just to screw with people." How close have you come to doing that?
Well, a few years ago, I was in a mayor's race in 2005, and my opponent said that we intentionally switched in a river parade in San Antonio.
Well, you did.
We did not. We didn't mean to intentionally fool people. It was him, but we didn't mean to fool people. We did switch one time when we were in high school
yeah.
in class.
But
and
there
I
was a
can't-
substitute teacher, so that didn't really. She would have known the difference.
And the
anyway.
reason we did it, Mike, is because if you're twin, like every time in your life, people ask you this question.
Well, did you
So
switch places?
Yeah,
Like, you got to switch once.
You got to do it once so that we'll have something to say in instances like this. Yeah.
Congressman, you had your own big speech on the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. You stood out there on the Mall. What was that like?
It was incredible. First of all, to be invited to do it, but then also, Mike, to carry the tradition from Texas. Texas has changed so much over the years, and to remind folks that it was a Texan in LBJ that passed so many of those landmark civil rights bills, and to remind folks of that, but also to say to my mom's generation and John Lewis's generation that all their work is both treasured and remembered and will be carried on by younger Americans, that will keep up the fight.
And what was the human experience of being out there like?
Oh, I mean, I was crying. You're standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial, and just that moment there, on the way up, I passed the holding areas for Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, and
You stopped in?
No, I didn't. But it was just very special.
Mr. Secretary, as a former mayor of a city that received HUD support, what surprised you most about running the mothership?
It's a great question. I would say just that in a lot of ways it is surprising how slow the federal government moves compared to municipalities. Coming from the municipal context, it is like moving a big ship, and when you're trying to turn it around, it takes a lot of time. But the payoff the reward is that when you do it right, you can have a much bigger impact than you can have in any one city. But it is true, and I've seen it in the last 4 months, that when you're dealing with these agencies, that things just take a while.
Now, you were talking before about shrinking staff. Is there something that HUD does or did that you think that you just shouldn't, or that you wish you didn't, or that you're going to stop doing?
I probably shouldn't announce, to personnel things that we're not going to be doing, that they're doing on the fly.
But
I
pull
would
back the
say-
camera and do your sort of, I wasn't going to say, do your vivisection of
I think we just have to be a
HUD.
lot more careful. Like, I'll give you an example, and this is one that I have not used publicly. When I was moving over here, they, for those of y'all that work in the federal government, they reimburse your travel expenses, certain travel expenses. So I got the amount that they were going to reimburse for travel for me and for my wife, and it was like $18,000. And I said, well, why is it $18,000? So I said, give me the number for whoever we're dealing with, the contractor, and let me call them and figure that out. They were going to reimburse me $5,000 to hold our stuff for one night, 1 or 2 nights somewhere, like it was storage space. I said, I don't need that, and that was $5,000 that got taken off. But I can only imagine. Sometimes, if we're not careful, the expenses that do get set out. And so at HUD, what we're doing is that we're trying to be very careful and accountable and increase transparency. A big push that I've made is for HUD to be more transparent, to be more accountable. So that's I guess improving on what we've been doing is one of the things that I'm pushing there.
By some estimates, 50% of the HUD workforce is eligible and could retire tomorrow. How do you deal with an aging federal workforce?
Well, we've dealt with it in different ways. Just to give you an example, last year we were hiring 1,000 people, and we still shrank by 257 people overall. That's how much we're attriting. We're losing folks. A lot of that is to retirements. So we see this as both a challenge and an opportunity. The opportunity is that then you get in a new generation of folks who are eager and energetic and ready to tackle the mission.
Right.
And so we're choosing to see this as a great opportunity for an organization like HUD, and to focus especially on the people who are in the department less than 5 years, because we see that if they can make it past 3 years, they're more likely to stay.
That's really interesting. And what can you do for them, or how do you prolong that?
So we have a whole program that has been developed.
And it's HUD specific, or it's government-wide?
No, within HUD. Yeah, within HUD, and I won't take credit for it because it came along the pike before me. But it's focused on onboarding new employees in a way that welcomes them and gives them confidence about their role in the organization, and creates a network of the new employees so that they feel comfortable in the role. They're given opportunities to learn how to grow in their role and take on other roles. And they're more likely to stay more than 3 years, more than 5 years, and add that energy for the long haul to the organization. So we see this as a real opportunity in the coming years.
Congressman, the lead story of the Houston Chronicle, Texas to shine in GOP-led Congress. The new Congress will have a record 25 Republicans from Texas, the largest Republican delegation from any state. I'm sure you're very proud. 6. This is fascinating. 6 of the 25 Republicans in the delegation will chair a committee. What's that like?
That's remarkable. Of course, I'd love for there to be more Democrats out of that 36.
No, but what's it like for you to work within that big? Because the delegation does do a lot of stuff together, Texas in particular. What large state delegations, what is it like to work with all those Republicans, and a lot of Republicans now with gavels?
We find common ground where we can. For example, I'm on Armed Services. Mac Thornberry is going to be the new chair of Armed Services coming in. And we had a great conversation. We were both part of a symposium at the Reagan Library on defense issues a few weeks ago. I talked to him about coming to San Antonio. I have Lackland Air Force Base. We worked on protecting Texas military installments, for example. Not just him, but others like Lamar Smith. Steve Stockman joined us on that. Louis, just a bunch of folks. So, I try to work with them where I can. There are going to be a lot of areas, obviously, where we disagree. Lamar and I, for example, are from the same hometown, but strongly disagree on immigration. In fact, I joke with him. I don't know how we grew up in the same place. So I try to find the areas where we have common ground and approach them on those.
Since Election Day, have you seen a little more swagger in your Texas colleagues?
Well, I've barely seen them, but when I do, I think they're enjoying their roles. Like, I've never served in a majority. I've always served, whether it was in Texas or here, in the minority. So I don't know what that feels like, but I suspect that they feel very good because they're in very influential positions and because they know that with their own legislation, it's going to be a lot easier to pass their bills.
This is also from Kevin Diaz's Houston Chronicle article. Representative Bill Flores, right, Republican of Bryan, will share the Republican Study Committee, the conservative caucus. Flores has talked about promoting a Texas model in Washington, and his quote is, "The fact that there are all these people in leadership positions allows us to promote the Texas way of doing things."
And how does he describe it?
Well, that's the question for you. What do you make of the Texas way?
Well, I suspect, let me give what I would say is probably the most generous characterization of their argument. I think what he means, I suspect what he means is low taxes, low regulation, creates a lot of jobs, et cetera. Now, how he would specifically go about that, I don't know. You'd have to ask Bill. But that's what I think they consider the Texas way or the Texas model.
Well, and Mr. Secretary, one of the famous lines from your convention speech is, Texas is a place where they still actually have bootstraps.
That is true. Yeah, I would say that they've had success in Texas with this narrative that Texas has set itself apart with low taxes and low regulation. To my mind, it's not about low regulation, it's about smart regulation. There are times when regulation makes a lot of sense, and I think people across the political spectrum would agree with that. It has to be smart regulation.
Well, I mean, nobody's for dumb regulation.
Well, you would think that would be true. You would think that would be true. I think sometimes regulations get layered on top of each other as well. So it's not, when the moving parts don't end up working all together. But what's missing in Texas, really, is a long-term view for success when we've moved into an era where brain power is the new currency of success in the 21st century. Texas has not necessarily moved along at the rate that it should. So, I do think that in the short term, it's having more success than a lot of other states. There's no disputing that.
One symptom of that is, you hear a lot, and you'll hear more if Governor Perry runs for president, which I think he will, about the Texas model and job creation. But the fact is, they've imported almost as many people to take those jobs as the number of jobs they've created. So what you see is that as these jobs are being created, some of them are new jobs coming to Texas, but there are also a lot of people coming to fill those jobs.
So is the Texas miracle job narrative that Governor Perry has and will continue painting untrue?
No, I wouldn't say it's untrue. I wouldn't say it's as rosy as he makes it out to be.
How do you think he will do in round 2 on the presidential?
I don't think he'll be president.
How come?
I think that part of the reason is that he got so spoiled in Texas, being so dominant, and you saw this in the first round, that he didn't have to prepare or be as substantive as you need to be to become the nation's president. I also think that in his presentation, because he's been in such a red state, he's been so partisan. You can do that, I think, to some extent and maybe get through the primary, but when you get to the general election, people don't generally want either an angry person or a very harsh, shrill, partisan person. They want somebody generally, whether it was Ronald Reagan or Barack Obama when they were elected, somebody whose aim at least is to bring people together. And I think that Governor Perry has a long way to go to get there.
He's boning up. You both were kind to say that you read Politico, and we had a scoop this month that he's doing, in December, his last full month in the governor's mansion, he's doing a couple hundred meetings with donors, operatives, and policy specialists.
That's right. No, and that's smart. And he's doing what he should be doing. He's going to have a lot of competition, even from within Texas. Senator Cruz is going to be running for president. If Jeb Bush runs, he, of course, his son, George P. Bush, is a statewide official in Texas. Rand Paul, who grew up in Texas, and his father, I presume, is there now, is going to be running. So Texas is going to get a lot of prominence within that primary.
How will Senator Ted Cruz play on the presidential stage?
I got to imagine he captures a big chunk of that Tea Party vote. He has a lot of passion to him. He's garnered, I think, a lot of loyalty from among the Tea Party supporters. But again, I think his problem is going to be twofold. That once you get into that general election, if you're too far out there, you're not that healing candidate. You're not that uniter, as George W. Bush used to say. He was a uniter, not a divider. You're not that uniter that people usually look to. And the second part, I think the second challenge for Ted, and I said this on Morning Joe once during the government shutdown, is he's got to figure out a better way to be a true leader. I said the reason that he can't be president is that he can't lead. Fundamentally, usually presidents have this problem. They're not able to convince the other side, whether it's Republican or Democrat, to follow them. Well, Ted's problem so far has been that he can't even convince his own side to follow him. We saw that during the government shutdown. Now, he may in the last year have gotten better at that, and he's got meetings with House Republicans going on, and so it looks like there is a group that's following him. But you got to go beyond just a group of 20 Tea Party Republicans. You have to lead a nation, not only your own side, but also convince other people to come along.
We have another Twitter question at hashtag lessons from leaders. Congressman, do you mind reading this? It's the
Sure.
second one there.
All right. Where are the opportunities for representatives and HUD to work together on civic improvements in districts?
Oh, good. That's an easy question. You know, we work with folks all up and down the public sector chain, you know, mayors to statewide officials to congressional representatives. A good example of that is recently I visited New York and New Jersey around the second anniversary of Superstorm Sandy, and did that with Senator Schumer and then Senator Booker and Menendez, and Congressman Pallone was there as well. We also get a lot of feedback from our congressional representatives in terms of how the housing authorities in their districts are doing and issues that present themselves. So 24/7, HUD and the other departments are working with Congress to make sure that those needs are being met in their districts.
And I think it just depends what part of the country you're in. In Texas, for example, I represent a fairly urban district, and so affordable housing is still a very big issue. The lending, mortgage lending is a big issue as we try to increase our percentage of home buyers in urban San Antonio. And I think that's still a big issue across the country. And so these are things that we, not only should we work on, we have to really try hard to work together on.
Although I have to admit that he and I haven't gotten to work together yet on anything.
He didn't visit my district when he toured Texas.
We have a microphone here. We'd love to bring you into the conversation. If you have a question, just signal. But while you're doing that, Mr. Secretary, what kind of pressure do you feel running a cabinet agency that could change so fundamentally if a Republican won in 2016?
You know, I really don't feel that pressure right now. Because I do believe that with a baseline of our programs at HUD, people on both sides of the aisle see the value in that. People, whether they're Republican or Democrat right now in the United States, see that there's an affordable rental housing crisis. And we hear from Republicans and Democrats about the need to work with local communities on that. Same thing with things like the Community Development Block Grant, which just celebrated its 40th anniversary and was signed by President Ford. That's a program that's been around for 4 decades now that gets support on both sides of the aisle. This came up after the Republicans took over in January of '95. And you know, there was a lot of talk about would HUD go away, and there was one plan that was put together by Secretary Cisneros to create essentially 3 block grant programs for all of HUD. That never came to pass, and I think part of the reason for that, much less did the department go away, and I believe the reason for that is that at the end of the day, people hear from their constituents about how valuable these investments that HUD makes is.
So a better question would be, how worried are you about what could happen to HUD under a Republican president?
A Republican president or Congress? Congress because of the funding.
Okay,
generally.
but let's do Republican president, Republican administration, or Republican secretary.
Well, I mean, you know, one of the things I had a chance to do early on was to meet with former Secretary and former Senator Mel Martinez. For instance, I spoke with Steve Preston, who was a former Secretary for a short amount of time. It's been my kind of experience from what I've seen that whether there's a Republican or a Democrat, that the agency at least generally is able to function and meet its program goals. I think what you get with a Democratic president is a lot more interest generally in actually doing a great job with a department like Housing and Urban Development.
Well, then you would probably see more, I would think you would see more block grants, for example.
You see more investment as well. I mean, President Obama
but if you have a
requested
Republican president, in terms of just pushing it over to the states and saying, do whatever you want, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and that's possible. You know, it's possible something like that could happen. You could block grant more of the programs, but I don't see that. You know, we haven't seen that recently. I don't see things drastically changing. The positive is that the President Obama, has been very committed to these issues, and especially this place-based work. And because of that, there are many local communities that are doing better, having greater outcomes in education and housing and transportation.
Mr. Secretary, is it helpful or hurtful having your predecessor, Sean Donovan, as the current Office of Management and Budget Director?
Oh, very helpful. Very helpful. Helpful in the sense that I have somebody who's just a phone call away. You know, like in any job that's a big undertaking, you start off, you know, it helps to have somebody there who knows all the ropes, who's a very friendly ear. So already Sean has been extremely helpful as we've worked out different issues that we're still trying to wade through.
All right, now I don't want to start a family feud here, but has testifying before Congress changed your opinion of Congress?
I don't know whether that says something about after or before what my opinion was. No, I testified before the House Judiciary Committee,
yeah.
I think, on immigration in February of 2013. And then, of course, for my confirmation hearing before the Senate. I was in politics in San Antonio and as a city council member before I was mayor. So I understand that in that position, it is not just about the policy, it is also about the theater. And that's one of the big differences, is that there's a lot more theater that happens when you're in political office like that. And so whether that's the House or the Senate, then happens in these bureaucratic jobs.
Congressman Emily Ramshaw of the Texas Tribune wrote that last year you were one of the administration's unofficial ambassadors on immigration. What is your optimism about more action on immigration before 2016?
Well, ideally, you would have the Republican Congress now, of course, as Republicans control both chambers, pass their own bill with respect to immigration and then try to come to some agreement with the president. What's remarkable to me is that Republicans in the House of Representatives, despite Speaker Boehner and others declaring that they wanted to do something on immigration, not only did he not put the Senate bill out for a vote, but also they didn't create their own legislation. They didn't file anything. I would hope and I suspect that will change in 2016. And I would like them to pass something, even if I vote against it. I'd like them to pass something, because that would be a real starting point for negotiations with the president.
Them being House Republicans?
Well, the Congress, right? Because they're going to control both chambers now.
So that's you.
Yeah, in the House would pass it, the Senate would pass it. I hope that they are able to do something, like I said, even if I don't support it personally, because I think that would be a starting point for them to negotiate something with the president.
And what specifically did you mean when you said that you think things will change by 2016, or they won't change until 2016?
Do I think they'll change? I would say that in 2016 we're still going to be dealing with immigration as a major issue in this country. If you gave me an under/over 50-50 whether I think they're going to pass a major overhaul of the immigration system, I would say no. I don't think they're going to do that by 2016.
So it seems like a reasonable thing. Mr. Secretary, at your official Twitter account, at Secretary Castro, the other night you tweeted, "Thank you, President Obama, for taking reasonable first step to fix our nation's broken immigration system. What needs to be next?"
Well, as Joaquin mentioned, I believe that what needs to come next is congressional action. The president has taken a reasonable first step to fix the nation's broken immigration system, and he laid out the reasons why. He also asked Congress to act, and the American people clearly expect Congress to act. So my hope is that in the coming months, as the new term begins, that Congress will now put forward legislation that the president can sign, and hopefully we will get comprehensive immigration reform. I think both of us try and be optimistic, and so I think the next step is for Congress to take that up. And if they hate, they've said how much they dislike what the president has done. Well, the easy answer to that is to pass legislation, to pass a bill.
Congressman, as we were waiting to come on, we were talking about the fact that based on the results last month, it's certainly clear that Texas wasn't turning blue as quickly as you hoped it was or thought it was. Why?
Well, I think, in Texas, look, as a Texas Democrat, I was deeply disappointed by the election, depressed for a few days about it. But I think in Texas, as a Democrat, when you're trying to change the politics of the state, you face a few headwinds. First of all, you're in a red state, so you're starting at a deficit. The second thing is you're subject to national politics. We know that the party of the president in midterms usually loses. So you're dealing with two things already. But the other thing, I think, Mike, is when such a low percentage of people vote, and I think the final number I saw in Texas was something just shy of 32% that voted. It could be off a point or two, but it's around there. Nationally, I think it was 36%. When that few percentage of people vote, the answer clearly is that you have to make sure more people are going to vote, including many more in the Hispanic community. I was watching a graph of the turnout by age, by ethnicity, by all of that, and you look at the Hispanic turnout versus its proportion in the state, and it's like this. And so those things have to change, I think, for Democrats.
So right now it's about 18 or 19%
Right,
in these midterm elections versus probably what by 2014 must be about 40% of the population.
Right.
And for the under 18 and under, is also very high. And so 18 and over is still very high. That gap is something that I think both parties should have an interest in working on.
So we're about to get the hook here. So one more political question. This is for either one of you. As part of the bad publicity that you guys constantly endure, Vogue did a piece by Jacob Weisberg.
You never want to end up in Vogue.
With the headline, "Pair of Aces," and an Annie Leibovitz photo of you in your shirt sleeves. And Jacob writes there, "Their political project is to reverse what Karl Rove accomplished nearly 2 decades ago when he solidified the Republican domination of Texas." How do you do that? What has to change?
More people have to vote. You have to have a compelling message that reaches out not only to Democratic voters, but also to all Texans. I've made the case to the Texas Democratic Party that we should never give up on white Texans, for example, who right now are voting over 70% Republican. And we've got to do a better job of a lot of things. I actually have a long laundry list, but the big thing is you need a comprehensive statewide voter registration and mobilization effort. And we have not seen that in Texas, at least, in my lifetime, maybe ever.
Congressman, I think it's appropriate that I give you the opportunity to revise and extend a remark. The two of you did an interview in January at Firehook Bakery on Capitol Hill with ABC's Power Players. And you said that Secretary Clinton, if she runs for president, it shouldn't simply be a coronation.
Right. No, I think there ought to be competition. I think everybody expects for there to be competition. I do think that Hillary Clinton will win the nominating process, but it's tough for her because, ideally, I think if you're in her position, whether it would be her or somebody else, I think what you would hope for is somebody that runs against you, somebody that you can beat, and I think she's going to be able to be successful against the folks in the Democratic primary.
And question for the Secretary, what do you think is the likelihood that the congressman will be governor of Texas?
Probably zero.
Yeah, I don't think he's ever expressed an interest in running for governor.
Or hold any statewide office in Texas, perhaps succeed Senator Cruz?
I believe that Joaquin, if he puts his mind to it and serves well over the next few years, that he'll be in a good position one day. Ultimately, that's up to the voters, of course, and what happens in Texas. But I think that Joaquin will be in a good position at some point to be a statewide elected official in Texas or wherever life takes him. I think both he and I, as much as the press has been about how directed we are about doing one thing in life, we've never tried to box ourselves in to one path.
Congressman, what do you think is the likelihood that the senator will one day be on a statewide or national ticket?
The senator or the secretary? The secretary. Oh.
Yeah. Sorry for the debate.
I got the yeah, you're promoting him. Yeah, it depends. Like you said, it depends on what he wants to do. I think Julian's got a lot of options. You can imagine there are a lot of folks back in Texas that want him to run for a statewide office. He's been talked about for VP. I think that he's done an incredible job. He did an incredible job as mayor of San Antonio and has been very innovative already as HUD secretary. And so I think everybody knows I'm his biggest supporter. And I stand by him and champion him regardless of what he does.
Two personal things as we say goodbye. Jason Horowitz in the New York Times pointed out that both of you, to a lot of people's surprise, are tongue-tied in Spanish.
Yeah. Yeah, this often gets written as though you know zero Spanish or you know 100% Spanish.
Yeah.
We're able to speak some Spanish and to understand it fairly well, but we don't speak it fluently.
But I wouldn't say I'm fluent because I wouldn't go on Univision and give a full interview, right?
Yeah.
Because if you say, oh, I'm fluent, okay, well, please come do this interview with us for 40 minutes.
Yeah, which we're not going to do. Yeah. But at the same time, we can get by speaking Spanish. Yeah. It's just often written like you don't know any Spanish. That's not true.
Okay, so be honest, whose Whose Spanish is better?
Oh, Joaquin's Spanish is a little bit better.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Well, also
Yeah.
my wife is from the
Yeah.
Texas-Mexico border, and so she speaks Spanish to my daughter now. She still speaks Spanish to her family, so I'm around it now a little bit more too.
When you were mayor, you got a contract with Little Brown to do a memoir. Was going to be out before the midterms. Jason Horowitz pointed out that you rent hotel rooms. At the time, you rented hotel rooms out of town to work on it. How's that project going?
Well, I had to put it on hold to take this job. One of the things I learned quickly about this opportunity is that you cannot be doing something else that is income producing, including writing a book, working toward writing a book.
Even
while
if you
have this
highway
job.
in a hotel room.
That's right, even if you try to do that. So I have not touched it since that time, and the publisher has essentially set out a date of 3 years from that time to get it in. The thing is, it's almost finished. So I'm going to have to rewrite it by the time we turn it in again.
And a little spoiler here, like what's sort of the big idea of it?
I'll let folks read the book.
No. Come on, you've done a lot.
Well, no, I mean, it's a memoir, and so it's not a grandiose kind of articulation of policy. It's not supposed to be about policy. It really is supposed to be about my life story, our life story. I'm kind of ripping off his ability to write a memoir, getting to it first. Although he really could use this time to get ahead of me if he wanted to. So it really is more of a human interest kind of classic memoir.
All right. As we say goodbye in San Antonio, and by the way, is it River City or Alamo City?
The Alamo City.
Okay.
The Alamo
In the Alamo City, your favorite Tex-Mex restaurant is Rosario's.
Yeah.
What is the equivalent in D.C.?
Probably that Rosa Mexicano.
We're going to eat over there after this, so I guess that,
Yeah.
Rosa Mexicano.
That's probably Rosa Mexicano is probably the closest thing.
And where else do you like to eat in D.C.?
Well, I live in Woodley Park, and so we go to that Open City and
Open City Diner, yeah, it's cool.
places around there.
Thank all of you out in live stream land for watching. I thank my Politico colleagues who worked so hard on this event. Thank the staff of the Secretary and the Congressmen who make it possible. Thank all of you for coming out on a rainy day. We thank the Bank of America for this partnership, making these conversations possible. And I thank the Congressman, the Secretary for a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You did great. Thank you so much.